Good morning for our listeners in Europe. Good afternoon for our listeners in Vietnam and Asia. My name is Delphine. I'm the director of EVBN and will be your MC today. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all today for our webinar on IT/ICT sector in Vietnam. We will spend together 45 minutes approximately, including presentations and questions and answers. Please let me quickly introduce our speakers today. We have Mr. Rick Ivanovich, CEO of TRG International, and also chairman of the IT/ICT sector committee in EuroCham. He will explain us a little bit after. And Mr. Sylvain Pierre, co-founder of Officiance company in Vietnam. Then I will just make a brief presentation about EVBN very quickly and about the ICT Trade Mission we will organize for the companies who would like to join. To finalize the webinar, we will have Q&A session, but right after presentation made by Mr. Rick Ivanovich, we will also have a short Q&A session because he will, unfortunately, have to leave before the end of this webinar. Just let me remind you that after the webinar, we will send to all of you a quick survey, just 4 or 5 questions. Please take 1 minute to answer this survey. It helps us a lot to improve our services. Please, now I pass the microphone to Mr. Rick Ivanovich for his presentation on Vietnam sector. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Delphine. Okay, thanks for that introduction. Yes, I'm the chair of the EuroCham ICT sector committee, but as you can see from this slide, I'm also the chair of the American Chamber of Commerce ICT group as well, so we do a lot of collaboration between us. In my presentation, I wish to cover 7 items. Okay? IT parks in Vietnam, enterprises in the IT sector, the kind of revenue that we have in the IT industry, the imports and exports that's happening with ICT, IT training in the workforce, so we can look at the manpower, some thoughts on the outsourcing potential here, and some of the governmental promotion incentive policies that are available here in Vietnam. So let's IT parks. Okay, this is all based on statistical data from the government. So what we want to look at here is a bit of a trend. So back in 2012, we had 7 IT parks, sort of starting at 1 o'clock on the diagram. That's covering a land area of about 710,000 square meters. There are 263,000 people working in those enterprises, about 200,000 companies in total, and looking at about 36,000 people. Only a year later, it's grown, so we got an additional IT park. We're now 8. All right, the land area's increased, the office space has increased, the number of companies involved has increased, as some of the older IT parks fill up, and we've now got an extra 10,000 people just working these IT parks. Okay, so for some of you people thinking of coming to Vietnam, possibly an IT park might be an interesting place to base yourself. So, how many companies have we actually got in the IT sector in the first place? Again, we'll base the numbers on statistics from the Ministry of Planning and Investment, and we'll look at the logical progression year on year. Unfortunately, the latest data from the government only goes up to 2013. So if you look at 2011, we can see the split, okay, of the actual number of companies that exist. There are nearly 3,000 in hardware, around 7,000 in software, and another 3,000 in digital content. And they specifically break out those companies under digital content because it is a very, very big sector within the ICT sector in the first place. Moving on to 2012, we can see that there's growth in digital content and software companies, but there's been a bit of a regression on hardware companies. And as we move to 2013, maybe not much movement with hardware. Okay, software's gone back a bit, been a couple of failures, I suppose, but digital content is still growing very, very strongly. Next, let's have a look at the revenue that this industry is creating. Hardware revenue. Okay, going back to 2011, you're looking at about $10 billion. Okay, growing to about 22 in 2012, and over 35, it's about 36 billion by 2013. That's a very, very strong growth on the hardware. A lot of that is driven by mobile telephony. Okay, for those of you who don't know, Vietnam is one of the biggest markets in the world now for the manufacture of mobile phones. Okay, for some brands, it's up to 40% of their global production. So we have companies such as Samsung here, LG is here, the Nokia, which is now Microsoft, is here. They're all manufacturing here in Vietnam, and they employ actually hundreds of thousands of people in those factories. Software is only a little blip on top of hardware. Okay, if we exploded the chart out more, there is actually a growth year on year, but it pales into insignificance at the moment against hardware. But it is a very, very tangible number. And digital content, that's a little bit bigger than the software one. That's still going very, very strong. I mentioned before that the hardware was driven by what's going on with mobile telephones. This next section, looking at the hardware and electronics industry and the import and export. Okay, so exports we've seen have grown from 10 billion in 2011 to about 34 billion by 2013. As I said, the majority of this is mobile telephony. So it's not surprising that the imports is very, very great, because all the components are currently being imported into Vietnam, and they're using the lower cost of labor to assemble them. Okay? So the new drive that's beginning to come out now is a focus on some of these companies like Samsung to incentivize and promote their component manufacturers to also move to Vietnam to help shorten their supply chain. Moving on to the next slide, let's have a look at Vietnamese exports of ICT in the first place. Exports in general in Vietnam, irrelevant of sector, is set to grow by about another 10% between 2021 and 2030. Today, ICT, their share of total exports is about 25%. Yes, that is still mainly telephony because of all of those mobile phones. Okay, I don't know how much more growth we're going to get in that, because some of the companies like Samsung are already investing something like $11 billion in their manufacturing facilities here, the bulk of which is into mobile telephony, and I think that's already representing something like 40% of their global production, and they're not going to put much more here. Okay, some of the other companies as well, they're not going to put much more here because they've already put a large chunk of their global production here already, and there's only so much growth left in that industry. I suppose this is reflected by this next bar in the chart, where if we look at the 2021 to 2030 period, the ICT contribution is only going to increase by another 19%. It doesn't mean that ICT is shrinking, it's just talking about Vietnam exports as a whole is growing rapidly, okay? And the ICT share, we've already had their rapid growth with telephony, and so it's not forecasted to take such a big share anymore, it's only 19%. But 19% is a very, very large amount. Now, in these figures, which comes from Oxford Economics, they haven't really forecasted anything else major to happen in the ICT manufacturing industry, but one never knows because nobody saw what was going to happen in mobile telephony. It literally took everybody by surprise. When we look at imports, again, because of all the manufacturing and all the components required, ICT still has this big 10% share over that next 10-year period.
Great. Let me
Yes?
just interrupt you 1 second,
Sure.
just to remind our listeners that unfortunately at the end of your presentation you will have to leave the webinar. That's the reason why we will have a Q&A session right after your presentation. So our people, and the people listening to us, please don't hesitate to send us your question during the presentation. Okay, so when Rick's finished, then we can ask your questions. Thank you so much. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay, thank you, Delphine. So moving on to the next section, number 5, let's have a look at the actual manpower that's available in Vietnam, and the sort of the quality of the people that we tend to target. So in Vietnam, we have 290 universities and colleges, and another 228 vocational schools that are training ICT majors. So when we look at these statistics, we're looking at which institutions are providing some form of ICT training. Okay? It's only producing about 65,000 ICT students a year. All right? Currently, in the ICT industry, we have about 450,000 employees. And of that, about 200,000 of them are graduates and postgraduates. So that gives you an idea that, about nearly half of the people in employment in this industry are coming from university. Okay? And less than a half, or sorry, just more than a half, is coming through a vocational school. Obviously, the university is a bottleneck. There is a finite capacity there, and it's not as if universities appear overnight. Having said that, there are multiple universities that have actually popped up in the last, say, 5 years. We have the German Vietnamese University, we have the British University, which opened only a year or so ago, and we have the new Fulbright University from the Americans, which will be opening up in the next 2 or 3 years. So having said that universities don't pop up overnight, obviously the international ones are slowly coming in, and that will help complement what's available here in Vietnam by bringing in more and more of that international standard and that international curriculum. There's also been a lot of work by EuroCham, who's been lobbying the government for more vocational training, and some of the larger ICT companies, which are also from Europe, are also behind this effort and are growing their numbers. A good example would be Bosch. Okay, Bosch, they've actually set up in Vietnam an R&D center, and they currently only, and I say that with inverted commas, only have about 500 or 600 people, and they're growing that number to about 2,000 over the next 2 to 3 years. Okay, so for an international major like Bosch to see the opportunity here, and they've proven that it can be done, and they have the confidence to grow it further, to grow their numbers to 2,000. Okay, and they're not necessarily relying on graduates and postgraduates. They're taking people from vocational school, and they're actually using their own vocational programs, okay, from Europe to train their own people through apprenticeships and things like that. And as more and more companies do that, we will see more and more employees going into this overall ICT pool, which is great for the industry. So what's the outsourcing potential of Vietnam? Let's have a look from another perspective. Vietnam, we have about 92 million people. Okay, 65% are under the age of 33. So they're young, very eager to learn. We have this strong ethic here in Vietnam. Everybody wants to learn. Okay? Outsourcing, the cost. On average, we're about 30 to 50% lower than the cost in China. Okay? Maybe that is also a reason why people like Samsung have spent $11 billion and employed something like 200,000 people and put them in Vietnam, because if they're seeing those type of savings, and actually in their industry they're seeing savings that are even larger than that, it does make economic sense to move here. And if we compare ourselves to India, which is also seen as a low-cost outsourcing country, Vietnam's 20% cheaper than them. So there are some cost advantages of being in Vietnam. But that's just cost. So what's the government doing? Are there any incentives available to help an ICT company who wants to come to Vietnam? I want to point out 3 things that have happened in the last 5 years. There was a decision in September 2010, okay, and this is something approved by the government because they wanted to transform Vietnam into an advanced ICT country by the year 2020. Okay, so they basically decided to put Vietnam on the ICT map, and which is why they've come up with lots of incentives for ICT companies. And we've seen people like Samsung, who only entered in the year 2009, and they only invested less than $1 billion. 5 years later, they're the biggest investor in the country at more than $11 billion. I think the government incentives have something to do with that. In January 2014, the government established the National Commission on the Application of IT. Sounds interesting, maybe not, but the important thing is, who's the chair of that? Well, it's the Prime Minister. Okay, we're talking IT here, we're just talking about the country being interested in IT and trying to drive IT, and they give it very, very high priority by making the Prime Minister the chairman. So there's a big vested interest to make this all work. And as recently as July 2014, okay, there was another resolution to help boost the use and development of IT to meet the demand for sustainable development and international integration. Well, what does that really mean in plain English language? It means that the government has also started investing in itself and bringing e-government into the country. Okay? And so there are lots of incentives going along all around the country. So, for example, in the dark old ages of a couple of decades ago, to try and start up a company here was a bit of a nightmare. These days, it's all online, and you can get approval within the month. You can go to some cities like Da Nang, where it's a Wi-Fi city. There is free, fast Wi-Fi across the entire city. Okay? It's very, very common in Vietnam to have that. Not so common in the EU, though, is it? So what we're saying here on just these 3 things, and there are many, many more than this, is that the country, the government, the party, whoever you want to call them, there is a very, very strong determination to make ICT of strategic importance to the country and to make sure it's going to help boost the country to where they're trying to drive it. So that's good for all of us in this industry. So let's just give you a quick summary of what some of those incentives might actually be. There are corporate income tax incentives. What does that mean? So, for example, there's no VAT on a software product. Okay? If you set yourself up as an ICT company here, you can get yourself a fixed income, corporate income tax rate of only 10% for 15 years. That's pretty good, especially if you compare it to the EU. That's a very, very preferable tax rate treatment. We have preferential duties as well, so import of machinery, okay, things like that. Very important for a lot of our companies is IP protection by the law. Protecting our intellectual property is very, very important, especially in the software industry. I know, having spoke to a lot of potential investors in the past, they were very, very concerned about this. But the government is absolutely committed to making sure that your IP is protected. They have competitive service fees. And there are incentives for land rental, land leases. This is really related to the specific IT industrial parks that they have created purely for IT companies. Okay, so that really sort of hopefully gives you an overview of what's really going on in Vietnam in the ICT sector, trying to touch on lots and lots of different areas. And also, I hope we've managed to communicate that there is an ICT industry here. There are some real big global companies investing here. There is significant investment in this industry. There is tremendous support by the authorities, and there are hundreds of thousands of IT people here waiting to work for you.
Thank you so much, Rick. Would you mind sharing a couple of information about your company, please? Because you told us a lot about the market, but I would like also to hear you a little bit on your company, because I know that you can also help companies coming to Vietnam. Your services can be also interesting to them. So just a couple of things, if you don't mind, and then we'll go to the questions and answers. Okay. Again, the people listening to us can send the questions online, and we will reply online, of course.
Okay, thanks, Delphine. A few things about us. Well, if you might have noticed by my accent, I'm a Brit, okay? I've actually been in Vietnam for 25 years. Okay, so I've been here for a while. I guess I was I think I'm one of the longest Brits, or if the longest Brit in the country, but I'm probably one of the original people who actually got involved in the IT industry as well. As a tagline, what do? We help your business to shine. Basically, we want your business to be successful. Okay, so your success is our success. We've been around for 21 years. We have hundreds of years of experience. We have thousands of customers, and we are actually in 7 locations around the world. Only 3 of them are in Vietnam. People, well, we have a lot of them. We have about 250 people now in the company, and I believe, I think only 5 of them aren't Vietnamese. So we have about 245 Vietnamese folks and 5 foreigners. Okay. Some of these people have been with us for a long time. I think
21 years?
I've been there for 21 years. Next year, 2 people will be celebrating 20 years.
Wow.
I think my first and second employee. But on average, demographically, we're split 50-50. Well, actually, 55 male, 45 female, about 50-50 single married. Probably a third of the company less than 3 years, and everybody else probably more than 8 years. To give you an idea of what do we actually do, we do several things. We do financial management. That's a sexier word to say that we do accounting solutions. I am an accountant, sorry. So we do accounting solutions. We take commercial off-the-shelf product and we sell it, market it, implement it, and support it. We do exactly the same thing for ERP, mainly focusing on discrete manufacturing. We do exactly the same for performance management, so think legal, financial consolidation, budgeting, planning, balanced scorecard, that kind of stuff. The other sector is a vertical, which is retail management, so think retail point of sale. That's only for the Vietnam market. All the others are an international market, and I'll get to that in a minute. On retail management, you'd find us in a Gucci, you'd find us in a L'Oreal, you'd find us in Gap, you'll find us in Louis Vuitton, you'll find us in Brooks Brothers. We have about 500 stores in Vietnam live on our system. Hospitality is really hotels. Okay, we do back office accounting and procurement. We look after about 1,000 hotels around the world. I think we're probably the biggest company in the world who actually does that. And one of the other things we do is we do professional services management, and these are really solutions, time tracking, billing, and stuff like that for professional services companies like ourselves, or a Big Four auditor, or an architect, or something like that. We do a little bit of offshore development. We have a small offshore development center up in Da Nang with only about 150 people, and that's basically bodies for hire. Our customer base is now in 80 different countries. Okay, I suppose the interesting thing about that, as I said, we're about 250 people, and about 95% of those people are all based in Vietnam. So our consultants fly all around the world. On average, our consultants go to about 40 to 50 countries a year, okay? And they're all Vietnamese. To give you an idea of some of our customers, there are lots of brands there that you might know. So, for example, we have some airlines. You think of the global hotel brand, and we probably have them. We have about 80% of the insurance business is in Vietnam, venture capital funds, all sorts of things. So what makes us a little bit different? We believe we've got really good people. We're very selective on who we take. As I said, I've been here for 25 years. With TRG, I know that we have had more than 1,000 employees, because I can look at the employee number that we allocate to people, and we've gone over the 1,000 number, but we actually only have 250 left. So we have a very, very active internship program where we probably take, at the height, we would take as many as 75 people a year. Now we've dropped it. We only do about 30 or 40. And we take them on short-term internships, and we have no intention of keeping them. Okay? But one of the problems here is that people coming straight out of university aren't necessarily ready to work. So we see it as part of our CSR to train these people. We've started doing the same thing for internships for people from the States and from Europe. We believe we have great solutions, we have great support, and we have this Kaizen, continuous improvement attitude. Our beliefs, we believe that we should look after your systems and you even forget that we exist. All right? We have some customers who've been with us for about 18 years. They are global, and they basically have to ask us how their systems work. All right? But it's great for them because they don't have to worry about them anymore. Okay? The whole point of that is, most of our customers, they're not IT companies, and they can get on with their real business. Okay? And we're there to support you. Okay, so we have lots and lots of beliefs. Okay, and our belief really, and as when we select our customers, we look for customers who believe what we believe, and that's why most of our customers, I think on average, they go more than 10-year customers. So we have very few customers who drop off after a few years. So that's what we do.
Thank you so much, Rick. Very, very interesting. Let's go to the questions and answers session quickly. We have questions received online. I will start maybe just with one question. In a nutshell, what sectors in Vietnam do you see as more promising for European companies?
ICT sectors.
It would be great. It would be great.
Okay, there are a couple of areas that I see at the moment where the market is very much underserved. Okay, one of them would be security. Okay, we've run several events with the different chambers over the last month or so. Last couple of months, just really focusing on cybersecurity. Okay, I was actually only just giving an update, I believe it was yesterday, to the US Consulate General on basically what's going on in cybersecurity in Vietnam, because it is a regional concern. And we've seen that it's a very, very underserved market due to maybe a lack of education and a complete lack of security providers. Okay, so I'd say that would be one very, very hot sector. The other sector that is beginning to heat up in Vietnam has got a very, very active startup community, and the wearables community, or Internet of Things, whatever you want to call it, is a market that has an awful lot of interest at the moment. Okay, another area that I believe is underserved is is project management. Okay? And I'm saying this because recently, as in the last 6 weeks, a group of people have got together, or a largest group of people have got together, to establish a project management institute in Vietnam, or a chapter of it, of the European global body, because project management, not just in IT, but across any industry, is underserved. I suppose the one crying out for it it's not just IT, but it's the construction industry. I mean, looking out the window here, there are about a zillion buildings under construction, and you know, that one over there hasn't moved for 5 years, so I think they've got a bit of a problem. So, you know, where are all the people training and certifying people for project management? Okay, so if you can provide any of those services, come on over here.
Okay. Thank you. One other question, I will try to gather 2 questions we received in one. You mentioned low cost in one hand, and the other thing was about education and qualitative man-force. Okay. Would you make a parallel? I mean, low cost can be scaring. It's interesting but scaring. Can we find low cost but also qualitative workforce?
It depends what kind of workforce you want. Okay.
Samsung found it.
Huh?
Samsung found it.
Samsung found it. At the end of the day, yes, they are a factory. They're using semi-skilled people. Okay. So to that respect, yeah, they are taking advantage of the low cost here of the semi-skilled people. All right. I know when we did an analysis of why Samsung are here, it's a case study that we actually wrote earlier this year. We were looking at the costs of employing some of the sort of the lower end people that they employ in bulk in, say, for example, Beijing. They'd be paying around $650 for that type of person a month. Whereas in Hanoi and in some of their factories, they'd be paying the equivalent, probably around $400. So that's a massive saving if you multiply that by 100,000 people.
Sure.
Okay. When you get into the ICT sector and say, yeah, you actually want a programmer, it depends what the person's doing. If you just want a, you know, sort of a code monkey, you just want somebody to punch code, yes, you can get lots of cheap ones. Okay, but if we want the quality resource, somebody who can speak English or some other languages apart from Vietnamese, they're a lot harder to find, because just the language will give them a premium. I think the harder thing here in Vietnam is not an educational thing. It's the fact is, what if you want somebody with 10 years experience?
Sure.
Okay? Of course you're not going to find very many of them. As I said, I've been here for 25 years. The country only opened up in 1988, so it's only been open for 27 years, and we were one of the very, very first IT companies here in 1994. You know, so there was nobody to hire. Okay, so that's why we've built them. And so if you want a very experienced Vietnamese person with more than a decade of experience, well, so does everyone else. Okay, so you know, we warn people that yes, as long as you don't want too many people, you can come in here and you can find people, and you might be paying a premium. Okay, if you're in here for the long haul, be prepared to build your own people. That's what we've done. Okay, and if you build them well, they don't leave. Our attrition rate in our outsourcing center is less than 5% across the 8 years that we've existed. Okay, our people don't leave us because we pick the right people, we treat them well, and we give them the training and the education. So why would they leave?
Thank you so much, Rick. I believe we will have to go to our second speaker because time is running. So Rick Ivanovich has to leave us, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Rick, for coming. Thank you for sharing your experience. We could have many more questions, but unfortunately we have to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Delphine.
We have Sylvain Pierre also sharing his experience working in officials. Sylvain will explain us everything. Thank you, Sylvain, for being here today.
Thank you very much, Delphine. Thank you, Rick, for the overview. What I would like to do in the coming 10 to 15 minutes is to give an overview of IT outsourcing in Vietnam and give it a more hands-on approach. So this is going to be very short, 10 to 15 minutes. My objective is to share with you experiences and actual examples of what I've witnessed over the past 10 years. So we'll very quickly go through Vietnam facts and figures, a little presentation about myself and my company, and then I would like to focus a little bit on two aspects of IT outsourcing, maybe the ones that would interest you the most. Selecting your IT provider in Vietnam and working with him. Very quickly about myself, I've been living in Vietnam for 10 years now. I co-founded the company in 2006. I have a lot of experience dealing with customers, and I've been working on outsourcing projects, BPO, ITO, over the past 10 years. More recently, and as Rick talked about it a little bit, I've been involved in the startup ecosystem over the past 2 years. It has been really booming in Vietnam. Very quickly, talking about my company, what we do, in short, is offshoring in Vietnam. That's what we like to say. Offshoring in Vietnam means offshore outsourcing with a social twist. Our vision is basically to help Vietnam leapfrog into the digital economy through outsourcing, but not only. We support local startups by technical expertise or providing a space to co-work, for example, and also by organizing regular IT meetups. We have a full range of outsourcing services, from IT to business process to data entry. I let you quickly look at the different kind of services that we provide and a little bit of figures about the company. We have 250 staff in Vietnam. 95% of them are Vietnamese. We do have a few expat staff and offices in Saigon and Paris. Now, what about Vietnam as an IT outsourcing destination? Rick already gave us an overview about Vietnam as an outsourcing destination, but how about IT a little bit more specifically? Well, what's interesting is that Vietnam has been going up a lot over the past 10 years in the different rankings that you can find provided by A.T. Kearney or Thornton. Thornton providing the top 100 outsourcing destination. From a more practical point of view, what are the positive aspects of Vietnam? Well, what I would like to share is, first of all, over the past 10 years, I have witnessed that English speaking skills have dramatically increased. I've been doing hundreds of interviews with a lot of people from 2006 until now, and this skill has really increased. You can see schools, English schools, popping up at every street corner with parents picking up their kids, creating traffic jams. Second thing, as part of the positive aspect, is, I believe, the international recognition of Vietnam. I've been traveling to Japan over the past 2 years, and actually Japanese companies are doing a lot, everything they can to bring Vietnamese IT engineers to Japan. The best example is FPT, which is the biggest IT provider in Vietnam. FPT opened a program specifically to send Vietnamese IT engineers to Japan. That, I believe, that example should tell you a little bit on how to position outsourcing provider. It's not only a back office, it's actual talented people that you can find in Vietnam. Now, talking a bit about the drawbacks, because we don't talk about it, there are a lot of engineers graduating in Vietnam. Rick gave you the figure of how many people actually work in the industry. But what's interesting to notice is that there is actually a perceived shortage of IT resources. a lot of IT people I've been talking to over the past 2 years talk a lot about this shortage. What this creates is, for example, increase in salaries and also gaps in value for money when you hire people. Moving on to how to select your ITO provider if you come to Vietnam. I split ITO provider in Vietnam in 3 different categories. I call them global, local, and local. So global provider is your, let's call it average delivery center, the ones that you would find in India, for example. Think Capgemini or Accenture. Vietnam has its share of delivery center. Interestingly, over the past few years, some IT companies, such as IBM or Atlassian, very recently left Vietnam. So that's an interesting point to notice. The main reason to mention that they mention is the difficulty to hire talented people. The fact is, personally, I don't believe there is an actual shortage of people, and I don't believe there is a difficulty to hire talented people. What I believe is that the big IT provider, the worldwide IT provider, have in Vietnam difficulties to hire people. They have a difficulty to attract talents at a fair price. And they have difficulty to attract talent at a fair price and also to keep them in their company. They will often offer a little bit inflated salaries, and it had a little bit of negative impact on the IT market. What's also interesting about global provider is they have very strict management practices. So those practices, it will limit the possibility to leverage on local talents, meaning that management is very strict, people just follow orders, and you will have difficulties to really benefit from the innovation capabilities of Vietnamese engineers. That's for the global provider. Now, if we look at local providers, we have a few local providers. I'm thinking, I will give you a name, probably you never heard of it, like Viet. Local providers are much smaller companies. There are a few interesting things to notice about local providers. So some are a little bit cliche, but still worth mentioning. When interacting with local providers, you will notice that a lot of them have a difficulty to say no. They, working on projects, have difficulty to ask questions, and more importantly, a little bit of difficulty to manage customer expectation over the course of a project. On the fun fact side, if you visit your local provider in Vietnam, you will most probably notice nap packages lying around the office. So napping at noon is a very, very common practice, and it's something you shouldn't be surprised about when you visit a local provider. Working with a local provider, it's also knowing that yes doesn't often mean I fully understood what you just explained to me. So it's something to take into account when you want to work with the local provider. Do not underestimate the time that you will spend on the phone. Now, on the positive side, once you learn how to work with the local provider, you will really, really benefit from unique viewpoints on specific technical aspects of your project. Moving on to the third category, what I call global provider. What I believe is that global can be the best of both worlds if the mix is successful. One of the main concerns of my partners working in IT over the past 10 years is turnover. What I would answer, and I will address this one a little bit after, is with a good recruitment and constant care, it's very easy to avoid. Overall, and to conclude on the selection of your ITO provider, I think the main question to ask when choosing a provider is, why are you doing business in Vietnam? Do you just want to leverage on low cost, or do you actually want to leverage on the innovation capabilities of Vietnamese engineers? Now, once you have selected a provider in Vietnam, how do you work with them? Well, for me, the most important is the idea of partnership. So, of course, the idea of partnership is something that is true not only in Vietnam, it's true all over the world as soon as you start doing outsourcing. You have to be close. It's true for Vietnam, very true. You have to be close to your provider. Our teams at Officiance, it happened, can easily lose motivation if the partner, the customer, is not coming regularly to Vietnam to meet people. Vice versa, it's very interesting to use business trip to Europe as a reward for your workforce in Vietnam, for your partner in Vietnam. As far as building up operation is concerned, I guess you want to keep small to medium-sized team, or at least take time in your recruitment. Recruitment is really the one critical point that you have to focus on when working with an outsourcing provider in Vietnam. As much as possible, meet people who will work with you directly, the engineers who will work with you. Don't hesitate to join potential recruiting session. Trust your intuition and select people with whom you are fully convinced. You will save a lot of time later on. So avoiding turnover, avoiding people leaving for whatever reason. One thing to notice in building up operation is that engineers in Vietnam do not only look at salary anymore. They want to work on challenging products and services. They want to build up their skills. So the first question, even before salary, is what am I going to work on? What products am I going to develop? Now, how do you make the most of Vietnam? Everything included, I think that going for Vietnam as an outsourcing destination will save you 10% of cost. The most important is to get resources that you actually can't get in Europe. It happens. A lot of customers tell me, I can't find those resources and I can't find them in Vietnam. As I was talking about in the intro, Vietnamese engineers are wanted everywhere. I talked about Japan, I talked about France. So really don't consider your partner, your outsourcing provider, as just an offshore back office. Your partner has to somehow be part of your company. We had the best successes when our employees felt they were part of our customer's company. And last but not least, Vietnam is becoming an actual market. And you have to think also about your provider as a perfect partner to help you enter the market. That's my last one.
Okay, thank you so much. We will jump after to a Q&A session. I will try to make my presentation very quickly because we are running a little bit out of time. So just to tell you a few words about EVBN. EVBN means EU Vietnam Business Network. I will not give too many details. You have the slide here on screen. This presentation will be also available on our website after the webinar, so you can download it easily. So I will not go too much into details about the setup of the EVBN project. Just keep in mind that it's a project co-funded by the European Union, which of course gives us a lot of advantages to better welcome European companies. We provide a lot of services. We have a help desk. You can address us your questions. We provide pre-market check, market analysis, etc. We also provide business partner search, but today one of our main product, I would say, service is to organize collective business delegations and collective participation on trade fairs in Vietnam. Collective meaning, of course, group of companies, of European companies coming from all over Europe. You can see here our team. So we are today a team of 10 people plus our chairman, but he's not a permanent staff. So we have already quite good resources to welcome you in Vietnam. We most of all have a consortium with partners based in Vietnam and in Europe, and this, of course, allows us to deliver very efficient services. A quick word about the I.T.I.C.T. Trade Mission we will organize in Vietnam in January. This trade mission will happen from the 19th till the 22nd of January. It will allow the companies who will visit us to visit and discover the two markets in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, which are so far the two main cities in Vietnam for your sector. This will, of course, be the opportunity to meet potential partners, because our main objective is to organize B2B sessions. So each participating company will have a full day of meetings in Hanoi and a full day of meetings in Ho Chi Minh. You can have here the detail of this week. Basically, we will spend the 2 first days in Ho Chi Minh and the 2 last days of the week in Hanoi. Sorry, the opposite. No, this is 2 first days in Ho Chi Minh, 2 last days in Hanoi. I'm trying to make it quickly because I know some of you cannot attend for longer. Let me share a couple of examples. We had this lifestyle trade mission in October. Same format, 2 days in Ho Chi Minh, 2 days in Hanoi. That was a huge success. You can see on the left picture the info session we organized on the first day. This is to deliver useful information to the European companies participating. Most of the companies are newcomers, meaning that they need to receive useful information about the Vietnamese market, how to work with Vietnamese, how to behave sometimes, what questions you should ask, what kind of contract you should sign or not sign, etc., etc. The second picture, you can see the B2B matchmaking. So we run it as a forum. Each European company has its own table with its own translator and, of course, its own tailored B2B agenda. Other pictures of this same event, taking into consideration that we already have a great experience in organizing such collective trade missions to Vietnam. We already did on different activity sectors. This will be the first time on I.T.I.C.T. and we wish it will be a huge success. You have here our details. So I'm Delphine Rousselet. You have my detail and my email. And the business service officer person in charge of this event is Miss Van An Nguyen. You have her email also in this slide. Let's go quickly to a Q&A session. We received some questions online. Sylvain, for you. What is the openness of the market for small and medium IT companies from abroad? Would you have something to share with us? What is the openness of the market for small and medium IT companies from abroad?
Okay.
Basically, it's almost the same question I asked Rick. What promising sectors would you see for European companies trying to penetrate this market?
Okay, so
outsourcing can be one.
Outsourcing can be one. So for small and medium businesses, if we're thinking about startup or small businesses, e-commerce is picking up really fast in Vietnam. If you take the current biggest e-commerce platform in Vietnam, which is Lazada, created by Rocket Internet, it generates almost 1 billion revenue. It generated almost 1 billion revenue in 1 billion USD revenue in 2015. And focusing on e-commerce, one interesting aspect is the payment. How do customers pay? So if one company comes to Vietnam and manages to solve that payment issue, which today is done, it's cash on delivery. So if one company manages to solve that, they will have a big market to address.
This is in a way related to what Rick mentioned about security.
It's in a way related to the fact that I believe very few people believe in banks and trust actually banks and the banking system in general. What's interesting in Vietnam, maybe a second point very quickly, what's interesting is that there is still, I believe, a lot of room for what I would call Me Too companies, meaning things that are proven, ideas that are proven, and that you basically just import from abroad to Vietnam. What matters is basically how you will execute your idea. I'm thinking of a very simple example. There is a co-working space in Saigon. It's a cafe basically, but it can work for any kind of business. The execution is absolutely perfect. It's up to international standards, and it works brilliantly. It really works brilliantly. What I believe is that any Me Too business that you bring to Vietnam, for which the execution is close to perfect, will work.
Okay, thank you so much. I believe we have now to close our webinar. It was almost an hour. So let me just remind our listeners, both in Europe and Asia and Vietnam, that we will send you a survey. It's just a very quick thing to do. Please take 1 minute to answer the questions. For the companies who attended the webinar and are interested in participating in our trade mission in January, please, I would say, speed up, because we already have applications and the time is running. So for those companies interested, we would need to receive your application form very quickly. You can find the application form on our website. You have our details, so don't hesitate to contact us if you need any further information before applying. Of course, it will be a pleasure to answer all your questions. And last but not least, I know we have a lot of Portuguese companies listening to us today. Just a few words maybe to welcome you. Eu falo português, mas não vou falar muito, porque é muito difícil para mim. Eu falei quando eu era uma menininha, mas só para falar que seria um prazer, um grande prazer, acolher eles em Vietnam in January. I don't remember. Janeiro. Thank you so much for your presence today. We hope to welcome all of you soon in Vietnam, and you know where we are, so if we can help,